Hello everyone, my name is Aruj
I'm Ruanne.
and we are both seniors at UCLA. We're both commuters as well as second year transfer students.
And in this video, we're going to share pros and cons of commuting, why we decided to commute instead of dorm, and also our best tips to make commuting as easy as possible because it's a little rough sometimes. Okay, so we're getting started with cons for commuting, and the first one I have on here is exhaustion, mental and physical. So personally for me, I guess the best analogy I can give is like when you rock a baby to sleep, they easily go to sleep. That's like the same for me. So when I commute, I actually sometimes commute with my dad because he lives in he works near the UCLA area, so we commute together sometimes, to save on gas, to save on money. So on days that I get to commute with him, I usually just nap in the car, and I usually nap pretty fast.
That's so nice.
Because the motion of the car is just so soothing, and I'm very close to the ground, so I get really tired. So that's exhausting sometimes because it takes me a while to really get back on my feet and I guess feel awake and alive again. Mm-hmm. So that is mentally draining and a bit physically draining because it's almost like my body fell asleep and then now I have to go to class and study for all my classes. Mm-hmm. And then physically it can be draining because, so for example, if you're commuting, you have to park your car, so sometimes the parking lots are farther from where your classes are. Since you're not in a dorm, you can't really go close to there, so there's a lot of walking involved, even though that's ironic because you're driving a car and commuting, but it has its gives and takes.
Yeah, I think for the exhaustion point, I think I'm the other way around where since I am the one driving, I don't really carpool, unfortunately. I am always falling asleep at the driving wheel, so then I have to keep stuff with me to make sure that I stay awake, and then the mental exhaustion is ooh, you get really stressed out. Because if I'm 10 minutes late when I'm leaving, and that makes I'm going to be 30 minutes later in terms of my arrival. So you're constantly stressing to leave at a certain time. So I think the exhaustion is so real, but then also I think the traffic really affects your mood, especially because we're in LA. I know the 405 is known for its bad traffic. So when I'm commuting either here or back home, it's just sometimes the traffic gets to you. No matter how much you try to make it a pleasant experience, it does mentally affect you. Sometimes I'll be grumpy when I get home, or I'll be grumpy when I get here, although that does go away the moment I walk on campus. I'm okay, that's pretty. That's the one good thing about having a really beautiful campus, is that you can the grumpiness really goes away really fast. But I think it does mentally affect you, and it just has this terrible, I don't know, I just get in a sucky mood very often because of it.
No, that's very valid. And another con is sometimes you just have less time on campus. So say there's5 where your classes are early in the morning, and usually for me personally, peak times of traffic is around 5 or 6 because everyone from work is trying to go home, or afternoon sometimes during lunch. So sometimes I'll just try my best to leave early from campus just to avoid long traffic times 1 to 2 hours, because that's a lot of time out of your day if you think about it. So sometimes there's just less time on campus, and I guess that kind of takes away from your college experience. I don't really know, but I think that kind of leads into what Aruj is going to talk about in the next con.
Yeah, definitely. I think the last con is that you don't always feel like a UCLA student. I think being a transfer adds another layer to that, is because we don't really get the 4 full years. With the pandemic, it's even less. I believe 1.5 quarters since we've transferred has been online, almost. Altogether. So with that, plus commuting, plus being a transfer, you don't always feel like a UCLA student. You don't get to do all of the things that a UCLA student would do. You can try to cram as much as possible. I assume that's one thing, but I always correlate it to how Nick Carraway feels like in The Great Gatsby, and he's I was within and without, simultaneously enchanted and simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. So you always look at all these dorm students and all these people who live very close to campus, and they have a very different lifestyle than we do. I don't feel necessarily bad about it, but it is a difference that is very, very noticeable.
Yes.
There's nothing like that for us where we're okay, I'm gonna go to the dining hall with all my friends, or I'm gonna go on this retreat, or I'm gonna just go to my dorm, take a nap, come back for my next class. We don't do that.
Right.
But I think there's the flip side of that, is that because we don't get to go to our dorm, we stay on campus more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's two sides to it. You don't really get to be a UCLA student as much, especially when we'll get to class stacking, because you're not here as often. But when you are, you're more on campus, and some students can be. So it goes both ways, I guess.
You can go either way depending on your situation.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, now we'll get into the pros, which are pretty much double the amount of cons, and that's why we decided. Well, I think we found out a lot of the pros as we started doing this, but we'll get into the reasons later. So Ruanne, please get started.
So the first pro is that you definitely save a lot of money. That was the main reason I decided to commute. So personally for me, since I'm a transfer student, so I was in community college for my first 2 years. During that time, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, and we all know graduate school is pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So, but I know that was like my main goal, and with that in mind, I knew there were some things I had to sacrifice in order to get to that goal, and in my case, that was in order to save a lot of money for me, that would be through commuting. Because dorming is literally, I always tell people this, it's basically another set of tuition.
It's often more than your tuition.
Yeah. So like say your tuition is like 15K, your dorming is like 20K.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have aid, but you know.
Yeah.
So I decided to save money that way by commuting. And yeah, it's not nearly as expensive as dorming. So that was a big thing. So that's a pro. You save a lot of money.
Right, that's true. And I think also because it's, well, definitely in the American culture, it's so normalized to have college debt that people don't often think how much they're going to be accumulating if they do undergrad, grad school, so on and so forth. And I think being community college students, we definitely took that into account because we did the 2 years free, and then we took in every possible consideration to make sure that the remaining 2 years could be as free as possible. So commuting is a big part of that. And I think another thing about dorming is that I don't like living with roommates or sharing a bathroom with somebody, which is exactly what happens when you get a dorm. Unless you're an RA, I guess they get their own rooms. But you're still sharing a lot of stuff. You're sharing kitchens, you're sharing laundromats, I guess. And I know sharing is caring, but not to that extent. I think it's such a big inconvenience to have to leave your room to go to the bathroom, or to constantly have people in your room. Sometimes you just need that privacy, sometimes you just need your own space. And when we commute, we're privileged enough to have our own rooms where we can de-stress there, and we have our own bathrooms and we have our own laundries. So it's not really a matter of, like, sure, there's that added distance, but look at all the pros we're getting on the side of that, because we still get to have this living standard and this living space that's beneficial towards my mental health, at least. And you know, in my case, I'm privileged enough to have a gym right downstairs, so that's another aspect of it. So you know, we don't have to necessarily struggle with that dorming life, because we can just go home.
Yes, another pro, since you're commuting, and in the case you live with like your parents or let's say some friends or other family, you usually can get fresh cooked meals when you get home. Like for me, when I get home, my mom usually has cooked something already or bought something already. And in that case, you not only get fresh food a lot, but you also save on money.
Definitely. Yeah.
Because food is pretty expensive. So the fact that you may have someone cooking for you, or they already have food brought home, that saves a lot of money and also time, because you don't have to prep the food. But in addition to that, it's also a healthier option.
Definitely.
Because I would say, at least for me, if I was a student living on campus, and obviously I'm already paying for tuition and housing and all of that, I'd probably want to resort to getting fast food a lot, just because it's quicker and I have a lot to do. So being able to go to home to family who have already cooked or have food already saves a lot of time and money for me.
Yeah. And it's also always just really nice when you go home, and after the entire day of lectures or academic stressful things that are happening, you go home and your family's there, there's fresh cooked meals. And I think it creates a very good academic and personal life balance. Like, there's a cutoff point. The moment you get home, you're kind of done with school, especially because we stay the whole day. By that point, there's no brain energy left to do any homework. So when you're there, you're done with school, you can just have your fresh dinner, take a shower, go to sleep. You know, that's what I do. So I think it creates a good So, and I think that's so valuable because in our culture, there is no such thing as a work-life balance, right? So for us to get that school and personal life separated, that's really valuable to me. And I think it's really only commuting that lets you do that, because when you're living on campus, you are living on campus.
Right.
And I realized this during the pandemic when work just came to our bedrooms and school just came to our bedrooms, how much I hated that.
Yes.
And I feel like dorming is to an extent, I haven't dormed, but I feel like that's because you are living on campus. You're living with maybe your classmates or people that they're going to the same school as you. So it's inevitable you're going to be talking about that all the time among other social activities. So then there just isn't that kind of balance anymore. You're always thinking about these very specific things, you know?
Right. And personally for me, I mean, it's different for everyone, but I guess commuting, I get to separate my academic identity from my own personal identity.
That's really good.
Instead of tying my personal identity to a school. And UCLA is great. I'm nothing against UCLA, but
Ruins for life.
just being able to separate my personal life from my academic life is something that I personally value. And I think that's a good skill to have, especially when you go out into the workforce. So similar to separating academic from personal life, being able to separate work life from personal life. So I think that's a pro, since you get to kind of have two different lifestyles and can maintain that balance.
Yeah, and it's also a good differentiation from high school, because in high school you go 5 days a week, 8-hour days, if not more if you're doing extracurriculars or taking 0 periods. And that's how it was for me. I was doing extra stuff after school too. So you don't really have a life outside of school. So I think with this kind of a commuting college career or college experience, I have been able to create a personality of my own that's
I
not
like
just
that.
the personality of a student.
That's good.
Right?
That's really good, yeah.
I think you have done that too, because we do a lot of similar things that are outside of the academic arena, like whether it be social media management or stuff like this, or just exploring different things, you know, and we can do that because we're not so tied to this identity as a Bruin or this identity as a college student, which we're so close to the end of it too. But I think it's not going to be a shock now when you transition after graduation. Like, we already know how to live without school.
Right.
And the next one is having a strong support system by being with your family or whoever it is you're living with when you're commuting, because I just don't think there is a stronger support system for me than what my family is right now. Having my parents, having my siblings, having my entire community from where I have been living for the past few years. And if it's the case that that's where you've been living for your whole life, then I think that's even better. Because I think we definitely tend to stigmatize a little bit people who stay at home when they're older, especially people who have already graduated. But it's sometimes good to be in that kind of a position where you have all the people who know you have all these people who understand you and can help you out whenever you need that help. And I know that being on campus, you can do that too, that there are a lot of fantastic people on campus that you can build a community with. There's nothing really quite like family. I think being from an Asian family myself, like, I guess I can speak for both of us, family is so important. It's just to leave family for a couple of years or maybe longer just to go to school, for me, just doesn't make sense. Yeah.
And I guess to build a little bit on that too, like, in addition to getting support, if you do have a supportive family, one of the reasons I also stayed home was being able to take care of my family, especially like, at least I had family who had different health conditions, and I don't know if it's just because I come from an Asian household. I know it doesn't generalize to everyone, but kind of I feel guilty for leaving. But like, it wasn't just that, it was more so like I really saw that they really needed help. They didn't have to tell me, but I saw that they needed support. So I thought it was just best to stay home too. But a main thing was like money and being able to save. But I think being able to also be a support to them and vice versa is a pro.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I wasn't thinking of it the other way around. I'm like, I get the support, but they also get the support by you being at home. Yeah, and I think my next pro is, I wasn't thinking about this in the beginning, but you get good at driving because you drive so much. I mean, for me, it's one way, it's more than 40 miles. So I'm not gonna say that I'm a great driver, but I'm definitely so much better than I was a year ago. And if I wasn't a commuter, it would have taken me a solid 5 to 10 years to get this good at driving. And I think it really builds up confidence to do other things. So for example, if there are events or something that I want to go to that's kind of far, my concept of time and distance has completely changed now. So if something is...
Okay, I gotta go give an example.
So my concept of time and distance is so different now that if I have to go somewhere to, like say we went to that Teen Vogue event, it was really far from where we live.
It was far.
But because we commute, that distance doesn't really matter to us. Like we know if something that does matter, I will go that far.
Right.
So we do. And I know before this is something that used to hold me back, and it's the same thing with other things. Like I have driven quite a lot to meet certain friends, you know. It's just different because I don't look at 50 miles as like a really long way to go. I just do it. You know, you just gotta pick a good time when there's not a lot of traffic, and you just go because that thing means something to you and it's valuable to you. So it takes that little fear or that hesitancy out of you, where you're going to be like, oh, it's too far, it's 20-minute drive. Like the 20-minute drive is really short for me now. Anything below 40 minutes I can do easily, and then anything above that, if it's worth it, I'll do it. So I just think that concept of time and distance changing, I take it as a pro because it has honestly helped me a lot.
And another pro is that my time management got a lot better. So obviously commuting times can take up your day. For me, round trip, it probably takes about like 2 to 3 hours, considering traffic. So it made me really prioritize what I need to get done at certain points in the day. So like for me, I use Google Calendar, and I literally will, at least most of the time, I'll block out times for doing a certain assignment or going to a certain class and having all of that color coded just so I can visualize my day better and do my best to get those tasks done within those allotted times as best I can. Sometimes it doesn't work out like that. Like sometimes I really need to spend extra time, but I try my best to at least achieve it within that time. Instead of, because for me, sometimes I lose track of time and I may take longer on certain things. So I guess knowing the commute times I have and not being able to do work or do assignments because I'm driving, that has allowed me to prioritize my tasks better.
That's true, and I think with time management too, I have a whole other video on this, but I used to think I was good at it, but this is a whole different level, because if you miss the right timing of leaving campus or leaving your house to get to campus, it's bad. It's bad. You get stuck in traffic. So that sense of urgency and that sense of just knowing what time it's like, I can feel things now. I can feel like, oh, it's almost 3 p.m. I need to do this or I need to do that. And that has that is kind of poured over to some of my other tasks that I do on other days when I'm not on campus, because I only come to campus 3 days this quarter. Usually it's 2 days a quarter. So the rest of the time too, I keep like this is I kind of plan my life with keeping this in the center. Like, okay, these are the days I have to go to campus, and these are all the other days I have to finish all these things, and it keeps me on a good track to finish everything that I need to finish, and then make sure I have things for class. And when I'm here, I think it really helps with knowing, okay, I have to leave in 2 hours. Let's finish this one assignment in these 2 hours, or something like that. It's just a good sense of urgency. You need a little bit of that sometimes. You know? So this is a really weird pro. But I realized that when I'm commuting, because I commute alone mostly, this is the only time of the day that I get to myself with my own thoughts, which is wild to think about as Gen Z, because we do not sit with our own thoughts. We're always on social media or doing something or reading or anything to get out of our own head, but we know how important it is to be able to just let yourself think. And when you're driving, you can't go on Instagram. I hope you're not going on Instagram when you're driving.
Please don't do that.
So, I mean, when you're driving, you're obviously driving, you're focusing on that, but a lot of times there is traffic. There's nothing I can do to avoid that. And you have to sit with your own thoughts. And in the beginning, that was really hard, because I would get the urge to go on Instagram during traffic, but I don't ever do that because I'm always scared that I'm going to die doing that. So, like, just being able to sit with your thoughts and think about everything that has happened. So when I'm coming to campus, think about all the home stuff, and when I'm going back home, think about all the campus stuff. And when you go home or when you get to campus, you're kind of a clean slate at that point, and you can just kind of start your day. Or when you're back home, you're kind of a clean slate and you can just now relax. And I think that buffer, it's a really long buffer, I get that, but that buffer time that's built in, that's really valuable, because other than this time, throughout the entire week, I don't have any other time where I just sit and think. So now that we've gone over the cons and the pros, we want to get into the actual reasons for why we decided to commute instead of dorm, which I guess we could have done first, but I don't know. I think I wanted to give the pros and the cons out first, because if you already think of commuting, you already kind of have your reasons,
Right.
but I wanted to go over our reasons too. So do you want to get started?
Yes. So the first reason, at least for me, why I decided to commute instead of dorm was to not go into debt.
Very important.
So I had mentioned this earlier in the video, but I knew I wanted to go to graduate school. And I knew graduate school was very expensive. So I knew a step I could take to be in the least amount of debt as possible, since that was a big thing for me. I wanted to be in as least debt as possible. So in order to work towards that goal, I thought commuting was the best option, since dorming costs are literally another set of tuition.
Yeah.
And another one is, it didn't make sense to move out in the midst of the pandemic. And now that I look at it, I really am glad I went the commuting route. Yeah, because we were mostly at home and it was virtual.
Yeah.
So there was no point in dorming.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that honestly saved a lot of money in the most convenient time too.
Right. Which
'Cause-
that part we did not plan.
Yeah,
We did
you
not
can't plan for that.
Yeah. It just happened that it was we transferred right in the middle of the pandemic.
Yes.
And I think our first quarter here, fall of 2021, was in person.
Yes.
It went online after that, which is weird, because then had we moved to campus and we would have to go back home
Yeah.
and then come back,
Yeah.
which is, I just did not, also a whole another dilemma that I would not want to go through.
Yes.
Yeah. But next thing is the college experience, and I feel like people value this so much, and that's one of the main reasons why people want a dorm, is because they want the American college experience. For me, that didn't really matter, because when I think of American college experience, I think of, okay, you're living in a dorm, you're living with roommates, you're going to parties, you're socializing in clubs, you're networking, and you're kind of getting independence and learning how to live by yourself, all of that, right? I am already getting quite a bit of that by being at home. I'm networking really well through all the extracurriculars that I do, and I have done in community college. I have my friends both on campus and at home. I have strong support systems. I am fairly independent, I would say, even outside of that, considering I drive myself back and forth to school and then can take myself to other places too. And having a car is a really big deal with that as well. I think a car does provide you a lot more independence than to not have a car. And so I think in those ways, sure, yeah, dorming is also providing you independence, but so is a car. So that those traditional American college experience things, like going to games and going to parties, those just don't matter to me. I don't care. I'm not an athletic person. I don't care about parties. I like to stay at home. If I'm gonna go anywhere, it's gonna be like a museum or like a bookstore or a cafe, which there's plenty of those where I live. So I just didn't feel the need to I didn't even think about that. I think people started mentioning to me afterwards, and I was like, yeah, I don't care. And I guess we also have thick skin because we went to community college, and we heard a lot of that back then too. It's like, oh, but you're not gonna get the full college experience, like the full 4 years. And I'm like, I don't care. I just don't want to go into debt. For me, I think the college experience is about getting an education, like fostering this love of education and curiosity within you, getting the right tools to then go on and be a lifelong learner, and making some lifelong friends as well, and finding connections, and again, finding your personality. And I've been able to do all of that without being in a dorm.
Right. And also to add, so I was also thinking like college experience, I'm like, oh, like I think of like you're making a ton of friends, and in a way that is, I guess, true, because you're connecting with a lot of people, but just because you commute does not mean you cannot make friends. I literally met Aruj, and like we connected like on a friendship level because we both related that we were like transfers, commuters. It was in the transfer lounge that we met. And then we just mentioned like our identities, and part of that was being transfers and commuters. So I was able to meet her that way, and it wasn't through like dorming. We don't live here. It was simply through just like a pass by experience. So
Yeah.
If you're like scared that you're missing out, I would say you're not really.
You're not. I know about plenty of commuters that still go to games and that still
Yes.
go to parties. Maybe not as regularly
Yes.
as students would do, but I would say that's a good thing because you're at
Yeah.
school to study. I mean, everyone has different values.
It's a better
right?
balance.
But
It's
it's
a
a
better
better balance. That's true. For me, like, I think those things, they distract me.
Mhm.
And I don't find value in them. But for people that do, even then, as you said, balance is more important than... Okay, last reason why this is, I think, this goes hand in hand with the, in terms of priority for debt, is I come from an Asian family. Moving out is just not a thing unless you're married. And even sometimes married kids will still stay depending on what the situation is. So for me, like, it's not a common thing to just, in our families, especially being an immigrant family, that you move out at 18. It's just not a concept we have. So when you think about college, you don't think about, oh, I'm gonna move out to go to college. You just think, I'm gonna go and get an education. And for literally that reason, I did consider some schools that are closer to where I live, both in terms of UCs and Cal States that I could go to that were way closer in terms of commute, or would have been like a, sometimes even, actually none of them were a walk, but my community college was walk. So that concept too, I just think dorming never came to mind until after I had already made the decision to commute. Yeah.